that we're more battling the system rather than the young person that needs to be convinced, because it sounds like we probably can speak to their imagination. But if you're talking about the system just being focused on tests and that sort of dry part of the process of getting information into young kids, it doesn't sound like we're trying to connect with young people, or there's a difficulty there, but it's really the system that's holding us back from communicating with them.
Well, they're not mutually exclusive. So we can still connect with young people outside school. Okay, so we can bypass school very nicely on social media, especially on TikTok and Instagram. That's relatively easy. It's just that it would be very nice and very useful if the schools could adapt their curriculum. But this is a top-down effort that requires a fundamental rethink of the way we educate children. We can look to case studies such as Finland, for example, where there are no subjects at high school. It is a holistic curriculum, and the way you're taught maths, for example, is inserted into geography, and geography is inserted into chemistry, and everything is related together. And that gives young people a much better and more healthy view about how everything relates to everything else. And they would quickly discover on their own, which is the best way to discover, why geology and our Earth is the basis of a healthy planet, and how we need to use that planet in a way which doesn't put in detriment to future generations. So that would mean that kind of thinking, that kind of thought process would probably attract more people over to the geosciences. I haven't got any firm data out of Finland. It's not a big geoscience country, but I think that would be the way to go. But it's a long haul, that is.
About the idea of geological education, and contextual education that lets people do the sort of jobs they need to do.
Yeah.
So how we provide it, I think, is so open at the moment.
Yeah.
Part of the value of running things like industry short courses or preparing material is that it's not until you have to teach it that you truly understand.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. And obviously I had the luxury of presenting some of the courses with Sequent on Introduction to Resource Estimation, and you don't want to be standing there and not know your subject matter, because that is can be quite embarrassing.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think we share that common goal. And look, we're developing a few things in-house here that touch on this as well. I've been talking to some other people. Jeff's book is on the desk here, Education in the Sampling Space. Because there's obviously, you haven't touched on data yet and sequence, MX deposit, and how we integrate QA and QC into that. There's probably a whole world of...
Absolutely. Think cloud. Cloud is the future.
Yeah, that the cloud is the future is absolutely...
There's new strings of satellites going up all the time, so connectivity anywhere on the planet is becoming a non-issue.
Yeah, well, that is certainly going to be a benefit. So now look, we're solving one problem and making another one worse, because don't touch the geologist, because you've got plenty of problems there. And there you said the evil word education there, which is probably, the big underpinning root of all evil at the moment, because there aren't enough professionals coming into the mining industry, whether they are geologists, engineers, metallurgists, or other disciplines, right? Because it's very clear that the industry from 20 years ago in terms of professionals will not be the same as it is in 10, 20 years ago. We'll have all these machine learning experts and environmental, and social performance specialists. But, it's clear that, as much as there are now plenty of professionals on their CV with some sort of machine learning degree, we still are waiting for that entire learning platform to support the social performance, because you can probably say, hey, I'll take you, under my wing, I'll teach you how this works, but you don't go to the University of Social Performance, right? And here comes the gap with education again, and there's obviously, part of the reason why AusMM is doing what it's doing as well is we need to fill some of these education gaps, because at the same token, universities are arguably, well, let's use the word strategically, but I wouldn't say failing necessarily, but let's just say the university space isn't getting healthier across the globe. right? It's only under more pressure in terms of how it delivers its students and what background and what education and so on. So if it's not the universities that are going to deliver them, we do need the educated people in this space. Who's going to do it? And I mean, it's not a leading question because, I don't think the Institute, for instance, in this case, can solve all the problems either, right? But we do need these professionals. Is this just something that once there's a demand for 5 or 10 years, people will see it, somebody at a university will create something and something will just organically happen? Or
Well, look, I teach into the university system, and actually possibly not for much longer, but I'll come back to that. I think the missing word is vocational focus, and maybe it was always so, right? Look, universities. I left university with my degree in geology. Was a very good degree. Obviously, I was smart enough. But I couldn't jump straight on a rig and do the job. The first 2 or 3 years of my working experience were layering on of the vocational attributes that you needed to be a proper field-based geologist. So there's always been an element of this. However, I think my view is at the moment that there's not a lot of focus on vocational outcomes at universities. Maybe there is in the dental school, maybe there is in the medical school. Hopefully there is. But, and so young graduates are coming out of university with a geology degree, and you've got to take them and run them through another degree of vocational exposure for another 3 years before they become useful. And now, maybe that's so. Now, with the Institute running various 6-week courses, some of which you're involved in, some of which I'm involved in, I think that's a really, and of course the buzzword is micro-credentialing, but I think that's a very, very good development. It's clearly vocational focused. Module 1 and Module 2 of my ESG course is deliberately called Methods 1 and Methods 2, and we teach methods. And it's not philosophical and it's not conceptual. I mean, these are just pretty mundane methods, but at least that they're vocationally oriented, and it means that once people get on top of them, they can go and work usefully inside a mining company. So it's a good start, and we need to do more of it. And I'm enjoying teaching into the Institute courses more than I am into my university courses. I must say that, because I'm in an industry that I'm comfortable with. I'm working and teaching with people who are clearly interested, in our industry and want to find ore bodies and want to develop them. And with my more broader based university students, there's a lot of skepticism about our industry, and you can sense it. People are very polite and they're very kind, but you can see that a lot of them are just listening to me out of politeness, but they're really not interested in resource development.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, look, I think I touched on this before with you over beer, I'm sure at some point, but it's far more rewarding to, teach to a group of people who really want to be there and who have an explicit interest in that very subject, rather than either be at a high school or even at a university where some of these subject matter is like, it's on my list and I got to do it, but it's really not my thing. And that's just not nice to be involved with. But the education space is definitely where a lot of these problems need to be solved, and that's a bit of a clear signal that's coming out of this. And I'm pretty confident that for instance the Institute is right behind that. Obviously we recognize that this is a requirement, and I'm sure there's lots more that we can do, but it's great to see that things are moving, and particularly with crusaders like yourself, carrying a lot of this, and there's obviously others as well. That's it's moving in the right direction. Would that be fair to say?
Well, where the Institute's going at the moment in terms of vocational micro-credentialing, it certainly is.
Oh, look, not just the Institute with micro-credentialing in general. I mean, in terms of ESG and the general support from both industry, from practitioners, from institutes, stakeholders in general about, hey, look, this is important. I mean, obviously, Osman board, I know, acknowledges this completely. There's a course which is, there to support people's interest in this space to learn. Obviously, companies are taking more of an interest. It's just that, I mean, everybody takes an interest, but then we need that funnel fed with people who can actually do this stuff, right? And that's really where we're going with this. So it's nice. What I was trying to sort of get to some sort of summary point is there are good things happening. The realization is at least there. That's half the battle won, right? This is not just some other virtue signaling thing to tick some box on some corporate thing at a board. People, like it used to be with operational health and safety 40 years ago, I'm guessing. Like, oh, well, we'll put these LTI things on a board outside our mine and it will look really good if it's a 0, right? That's not what this is about. This is a true... we can sense a true signal of people wanting to improve, and there's enough momentum across the industry to give this, some forward movement. But I'm hearing that, that's great, but we need the people to come in to support that system, and that's perhaps where more work needs to be done.
Well, and we need critical thinkers, René. It's never been any different anyway. It's the same in geology, isn't it? Yeah. So, look, it's a growth industry. ESG is a growth industry. Everyone wants a part of it these days, which unfortunately means that there's a lot of rubbish out there now going on. I mean, I'm keeping a running tally of, let me call them global instruments that it's a highly competitive space. So there are all sorts of people developing these global policies, global standards, global lists of principles. That's what, I'll bunch them all up into something called global instruments. So, the IFC performance standards, at least they're credible. And the Global Reporting Initiative, at least that's credible. So there's about 8 or 10 of them which you would hang your hat on, and the rest are just sort of noise, really. Now, they may even have merit, but the running list I've got is now over 90. So, that just adds confusion. There's no clarity coming out of that. That just means that everyone's more confused than ever. So we're moving through a phase where a great deal of interest is now being, I won't say being focused, a great deal of interest is in play, and a great deal of people and institutions are saying, oh, we've got a part to play in this. And so we're at that stage where there's more confusion than clarity, and now we've got to get more forensic and come back and focus in on the to use safety, you see. We've now focused in on a standard 6 metrics, and all the other experiments have fallen away.
Well, is that because, and I've had this discussion on different subjects, but sort of the same kind of problem, is it because we're not having the discussion at a global level? Everybody's trying to do something, they're doing it slightly different, everybody's trying to develop their own courses, their own standards, and then you get this, like we all almost have with the reporting standards as well. They're all somewhat the same but different, a lot of confusion. Is there an argument to say to create some sort of global, council of et cetera, and put some people in it to make sure that things align better in that space?
Well, good luck with that.
I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just putting it out there.
No, I think it's a competitive ecosystem. The ones that eventually prevail and come out as the preferred standards and instruments will prevail through an organic process, and those that are not competitive will fall away, and we won't have to. So, like the Global Reporting Initiative is a good example. It's been around now for about 25 years, and there were various other reporting standards that were competing. I think over 90% of corporations in the world now report in alignment with the GRI. Yeah. So it's one, it's one, right? So I just come out and tell my students, don't bother looking at any of these others. If you want to be globally consistent and comparable with peer companies, the GRI. Yeah. Incidentally, the GRI is currently working on a dedicated mining industry reporting substandard. All right, so that's going to be very interesting to see how that emerges. Sure. And look, it will have hundreds of thematic indicators that could be potentially reported against. You can't be expected, and nor will it be relevant to report against every single one of them. But if you apply critical thinking, you'll pick up on the 20 or 30 which are critical to your context, and everyone's going to recognize them as being globally consistent. So look, the bad news is there's over 90 things out there competing for attention. The good news is they're all more or less consistent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, well, that's good. At least, I mean, I didn't know that much detail about those standards, so that's good to know. Maybe we'll include a link in the description of the video for people interested to find that information, because that sounds like some really interesting things to stay on top of if you're working in this space.
Yeah, and so, people say to me, well, which standard do I apply? And, well, the granddaddy of them all is the International Finance Corporation Performance Standards. Extremely onerous, extremely comprehensive. For a junior exploration company, it would be like breaking an egg with a hammer. It's too much, right? So I'm not advocating a universal application of IFC performance standards, but some derivative of them, because just about all the other standards that are out there actually take their cue from the IFC performance standards. So that's the good news. And what I say to people is, you can't just mindlessly apply a standard. You need a competent professional to interpret that standard into your context and say what you do and don't do. So for instance, on my course, I tell people there are 3 objectives of the course. Objective 1 is obviously you want to get your certificate, right? Well, everyone wants a piece of paper. That's nice. No problem, right? And that's actually pretty easy to do. I'll set some exams, you get the answers correct, and you get your certificate. Yeah. 2 is we teach you some orthodoxy. We teach you some things that are applied in industry now and how they can be adapted for environmental and social and governance analysis. And then the third thing is critical thinking, you see. So I want, in fact, summed up in the famous Latin expression by Horace, sapere aude, which means dare to be wise, or a better way to put it is dare to think for yourself. So we'll give you the orthodoxy, and then you have to actually critique the orthodoxy so that it's fit for purpose in your situation. Yeah. And the orthodoxy, I can tear apart the orthodoxy, as we all can, right? I'm sure it's the same in all resource estimation. There's an orthodoxy, and then you have to apply critical thinking to get it right.
Yeah, quite a bit of it. There's no recipe. So there's. I put it to him. I said, look, is there a global stage where we need to have this discussion rather than all these fractionated, little discussions and small little round tables? Can we have one big round table? And, look, admittedly, he runs Geologize and that's his target. So he's not particularly keen to, because it becomes political and you're constantly busy trying to, usher people around the table, and they're all going to be volunteers, and we all know how that goes. So that's as frustrating as anything else you would do. So I see that it needs to happen, but it's not quite clear where it needs to happen and who needs to drive it. And I can see from your perspective, look, where you say, look, it's bigger than a person. That's got to be a group with serious clout to be able to get people around the table. And I guess with my AusMM hat on, that's something that I'm passionate and the entire board is passionate about, is driving exactly that. It's just the whole reason why that education roundtable is being created at Future Workforce, because we recognize that that's not a discussion that you can have at national level. It needs to be had at global level. And we will be talking about this for many years to come until the pendulum has just done its thing and swung wherever the hell it wants to swing to.
I totally agree.
The future has been made for us without us trying to interfere with it all the time. But look,
I think I was just going to say, hats off to yourself and AusIMM and you, the whole of the AGC, who are sort of trying to get papers together and letters. But I kind of do honestly look at that and I think it's great. But we can write a lot of letters, and where's that actually going to get us unless they land in the right person's hand, unless it suddenly ticks a box for that politician to promote it. I think, it's a really big topic, and I agree, very much a global one. Then you could take the flip side of that and say, well, how many extra geos and how many extra geophysicists do we actually need? We're lucky in geology. There's always enough people that like looking at cool rocks that we don't suffer like from the engineering where they literally bottom out. I think, an extra 200 or 300 geos a year, probably another 30 to 50 geophysicists a year. I can't talk for the engineering side, but, we're not talking about crazy numbers. So, I used to think, even until yesterday, my perspective was changed even yesterday, that one of my aims with Nexus was a bit of an idea back in 2019 that we had, 150 or so at the time alumni. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if all of these brilliant, young, keen geoscientists go to one school a year? I said to them, look, if you each go to one school, wouldn't that be great? You'd interact with, up to thousands of students per year over the course of the group. But it's just really challenging for people to get into schools. COVID happened, it's challenging. But the other thing, talking to people yesterday at the conference, if you put yourself in the sort of mindset of when you're at school, someone turns up, talks to you about something and then goes again. There's no context. That's not if it's not linked to the learning, if it's not linked to your class, if there's no sustained, effort, then it kind of falls a bit flat. I used to go to the schools in Mount Isa and give talks to students of a number of different years, and you could see the mine out of the window. It was pretty obvious where we were in Mount Isa. I'd say 90% of the students didn't know what was being mined there. So it's if you can't educate kids in mining towns about mining, what about the kids in the suburbs, in the cities? So, it's a bigger question. But again, like I say, we don't suddenly need millions of geologists running over the hills. It'd be great if everyone had a better understanding of earth science, for the challenges that are facing society moving forward. But, I think there are, and this is the other thing in the space of geoscience outreach, and I'm learning about this all the time. In every state, there's an awful lot of good things happening. To speak of South Australia, there's something called the Geoscience Pathways Project, which is funded by the Geological Society of Australia and BHP and various other companies. That is a group of volunteer educators who sort of try and promote geoscience. Even just trying to get schools to sign up to teach more geoscience is a big problem. There's one lady who's funded 2 days a week to try and get more schools signed up. She's been doing that since the beginning of the year. I think she's got 4 schools so far. This is not something where, and I think, and I'm sure you've seen this in companies you've worked for as well, you're sitting there going, right, we need to do some outreach. How much we got? 10, 20 grand? Yep, throw it at that group. Yep, that'll be fine. Tick the box. Let's move on. Yeah. And that happens with societies. I've put bids in for various funding from various groups, and I've seen had the response letter saying, we funded you last year. We don't need to fund you this year. There's no sustainability there. Susie Urbanak, who I caught up with yesterday, who runs the Core Learning Foundation in WA, she's been struggling for 15 years to get any kind of sustained funding. She still has, even with probably, I'd say, the best educational setup for getting into schools and educating students on a grassroots level about the minerals industry. She's been running it for 15 years very well. It's probably the best model in the country at the minute, and she still struggles to get funding every year. Yeah. And you're thinking, crikey, and support, and it relies on her drive. These things rely on individuals to actually get up out of bed and say, I could be earning that money doing that, but you know what? I'm actually going to do this today. And companies to give the people in their crews the time, or their staff the time to actually go and do these things. And all companies like doing a bit of outreach, but it's always a bit of a, on the list of priorities on your day-to-day in a mine, outreach is going to be somewhere right near the bottom. And look, that's just how it is. But these things require sustained funding, a bigger model. So, in terms of what can we do, sure, we can write letters from groups of societies and give it to politicians, but, sustain funding from, having a pot of money that's actually there every year and is there into the future that can actually be used to support the activities that are already happening now and grow them, exponentially is what we really need to do. And, and the thing is, we're not even talking huge amounts of money. Most of these programs need 100, 200 grand a year to get by. So a pot of a few million, which is
spread over 20 big companies. That's just,
it's chicken feed, So it's probably someone I work with likes to say companies probably spend more money on Tim Tams. This is biscuit money. So it's it's not huge. But again, who controls it? When does it become political? And then all of a sudden you've got other people dipping in, and it becomes that whole problem that we've all seen many times before, which is why it becomes a bit of a challenge. So, I think really there are definitely actions that could be taken from societies and industry, like, coming up with a pot. The MCA do it very well and sponsor a lot of things, and that's basically how Nexus got started and funded. But I think we just need to keep doing it, and we need to identify what's already happening and keep doing more. I was even given feedback last year that, or even earlier this year, that why is Nexus dabbling in school outreach and that kind of thing? Because there's lots happening. You don't need to go into that space. And I said, well, geez, actually, I don't know where you are, but there's not that much happening. There are plenty of websites, and there are plenty of groups doing stuff, but it's all based on volunteers. It's all based on people giving up their time. So we need more of it.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's maybe a great place to settle, because volunteers all love and admiration for the energy they put in, but it just doesn't work at the level that it needs to happen at to really make a dent or to get the motion forward happening. If somebody like that you described has to work so hard year on year with a formula that clearly works, just to, and just gets enough funding to keep the lights on for something so important, and we don't have the dialogue right. And I think this is why we're having this discussion as well, and why we need to have more of them at the right levels. And from what I can see, we're having them, but at the same time, like you said before, I mean, industries go up and the industry trends go up and down. Right now, arguably, we could be looking at another bearish period, and budget will change, and it's an incredibly complex space. So it's, but again, as long as there are people like yourself, fighting the good fight, and people having the discussion, hopefully there's enough noise at some point to make change. And that's, I think, all we can wish for. But it's a wicked problem, as I heard somebody describe it the other day, and we won't be out of it for a while. But I do genuinely believe that at least we're moving forward, and there is a middle line coming out of this. We're saying the same thing. The right people are talking. The one thing that I think we can do better as an industry is to centralize all of those efforts, because as good as it is to have a group like Nexus do outreach, and this group here, that's everything makes a difference. But I think if you really want to make change at that level, you need more momentum, and unfortunately, it does come down to funding and how much you can do with that funding to really make a difference. And that's that's something that we don't have a solution for.
Training is not really our day job. I mean, we do it. We do the senior exploration management course because we're passionate about the industry and trying to change the industry, make the industry better. But in our day job, we're actually also busy out there trying to find ore bodies as well. So,
well, it's funny that you say that, because I was talking to Brett Davis about exactly this thing. He likes to teach what he knows to people, and so do I. And we're not doing it to pay the bills. I mean, it makes a bit of revenue, but it certainly doesn't create a business. So it's really because of the passion. And I talked to Richard Lilly not too long ago as well, which is a talk that probably has aired by the time this comes out, but also very passionate, coming out of the industry, going back into education, really just to cross that bridge. And coming back to something you said a bit earlier, there are definitely a whole bunch of little islands of excellent education, and they all cover a fairly narrow band, something specialized, and it'd be great at some point to unify that into something more. I mean, obviously the institutes, and again, this comes back to what you mentioned before, that we're both tinkering with either through the AGC or general interest, is, that whole university, I think demise is probably too strong a word, but the fact that education at that level is definitely moving away from the standard university space, and what is then going to fill it? Is it the institutes? Is it consultants doing their thing? Is it a program like Nexus that Richard is running? What is it? And I'm sure, I mean, this is an open-ended question, because I don't think either of us have the answers, but at least everybody plays their little part in it, because I've had a number of people on the podcasts talking about education. I mean, Jackie Coombs, also very passionate about this, has been running her courses across the world for years. And like you said, on top of a normal work week of actually consulting and doing all these other things. So it really is interesting to see where those solutions will come from. But yeah.
So René, if I can just share a perspective, my perspective on that, there's a couple of aspects. One is, I think the universities should focus on training people in geoscience, the science, and not really so much on how the exploration industry works, for the simple reason that when tertiary institutions tend to do it, they tend to get ossified quite quickly, because things can move quite quickly in terms of your various technologies and so on. So I think the focus should be on the science. That's the first point.
For sure.
I think that there should be some broad concept of what the lifelong learning syllabus, and sorry, I'm going to be biased to mineral exploration. That's my passion. What that syllabus should look like. And I think that maybe it's beholden on certain groups, whether it's the AusIMM, whether the AIG, to be in broad terms the custodian for what that syllabus should look like, and maybe to a certain extent say, yes, that's an endorsed course, or that is, or that isn't. But I think there should be freedom for the market for people to operate in that space, and those courses to be related to this syllabus. But I also think that we continue to have issues with intake into geology. I mean, it is driven by the mining cycle, but it also competes poorly with things. For example, marine biology. The analogy that someone gave me the other day was there's roughly the same amount of geophysicists paying tax in Australia as there are marine biologists. It's about 1,200, so not a big number in either case. And there's one university or something that's teaching geophysics, and there's 35 that are teaching marine biology. And and that's because our university model is driven by student preference rather than strategic need. And I think there's a discussion to be had there with the political masters, but I think we probably also have to acknowledge that if you want the next generation of geophysicists, you're probably going to have to convert them from people who've gone and done astrophysics and found that not everyone can be Matt Agnew and or Alan Duffy, and they've got to do something else, and so then they might come and be geophysicists in the mineral exploration industry. Even with geoscientists, there's obviously many people that will go into sort of allied things like maybe environmental science and so on, probably massive oversupply. But, if you could do a 1 year conversion course to give them some of the geoscientific understanding, or a transition into what they can do to become geoscientists that are more aligned with the mining industry. And then the sort of the last part, strategic part that I see of that is, I do think as a community, and now I'm talking about the broader geoscience community, not just the mineral exploration or the mining industry, I think we have to work a lot harder to promote geoscience in the popular culture through the broader community. And I'm not sure whether you're aware, but one of the things that I've been closely involved in for the last few years has been the AGC's geotourism strategy. And you go, well, why is someone who's basically a mineral explorer interested in geotourism, which is a very, very different field? I'm interested in it because I think this is one of the big opportunities we have as a community to reach out to the public and the broader community, because there's a lot of exciting things about when people go to the Kimberley, they go to the outback. If they can be exposed to geology there, geology is starting to enter the consciousness in the same way that marine biology does, because they watch David Attenborough or something on TV. Yeah.
Well, he talks about fossils as well. He knows more about fossils than I do. That man. It's so we should.
He's pretty good on fossils, but there is more to geology than dinosaurs, as they say.
Well, that's how most people roll into this. I mean, I had my fossil collection, and that got me hooked from an early age, going all the way back to the start of our conversation. And linking it to where we are now. At age 8, I knew I wanted to be a geologist. It was dead set, and that's.
But hey, look, before we
move to the end here, because I think I could probably keep talking about this sort of stuff for hours. What's on your mind? I mean, what are you working on other than that sort of development work? That you're is there anything else that you're seeing out there that is, you know, you think this needs to be discussed at some point? You know, what's keeping you up at night?
I'm sort of thinking, where's the next generation of mining professionals coming from, really? So that's something that I think about quite often in the valuation space, but more broadly as well in the sort of in the wider industry, and how are universities working to attract people to mining? And as an industry, I find that a complex thing to deal with, you know,
well, because
so
you said
keeps me awake.
Yeah, no, look, and for us all, because again, going back to the start, I think Jon was explaining that with WMC, they had this student or this plan. I can't remember what it was called now, but indeed to offer these masters and PhD theses and really back in the day, you know, incentivize people to, you know, do good science and come on board, and that link with the universities, and we don't have that much. But I agree with you, and I was talking to a few people on this channel about that future workforce problem, and it's definitely one of my most difficult questions as well. So I think we're all thinking about the same problems there. And
I think,
have you got answers?
No, I haven't. Well, suggestions maybe.
Suggestions.
But yeah, I've got two daughters, and you know they haven't really been interested in science. They sort of have, and they have had opportunities to do science. And like, I found it very interesting when they were at primary school that there was an arts room, there's a music room, there's a library, there's, you know, outdoor ed. And actually the school was built so there was a science room, but there wasn't, it didn't sort of get used for science, you know. And a lot of the science projects at school weren't really science projects. But there was a fabulous teacher that they had in Year 4 who, I remember on one of these open days, she had the students really engaged with it, doing very, I don't know, they were making popcorn or something, but she was explaining how making popcorn was science in action, sort of thing. So that's something. But, you know, I think it is hard to get women engaged in science as well. And I think that's a complex issue to try and tackle. But the other thing is, I think maybe in the future we're going to have to look for people outside of science and to work in our industry and think of different ways to recruit people and get people interested in the resources sector. Yeah,
because there won't be, as we sort of mostly acknowledge in the last 5 years, there won't be geologists, metallurgists and engineers. You know, there will be this whole range of disciplines that we probably haven't even heard of now that will be making their way into the industry. And it's already happening. You know, data scientists, you know, we employ data scientists, and
absolutely,
you know, never thought that would be a thing. And
I think you know, the younger generation as well don't necessarily see that they're going to have one career for their lives. They might want to be trained more broadly so that they can head in a variety of directions. And so,
Now, look, that I think that is definitely the problem of the generation. I mean, all the other problems, they've all resolved themselves, you know, as the world spins around every day. But that one is tricky. And as much as I think we can influence it, it's such a really big, heavy pendulum swinging, and it will keep swinging until it will stop swinging and swing back. I think correcting that big machine of trying to get more people and then talking about going into schools and that advocacy, it's all well and good, but you know, new generations have different interests, and going to, I mean, it was Richard who actually said, I'm next door to a mine. The school is literally in Mount Isa, next door to the mine, and nobody knows what's going on or has any interest in it. So what can you do? And I think we have to acknowledge it, and I think we should care about it and change it. But I think we could also waste a hell of a lot of good time for something that is just going to keep swinging and do its thing. And people will move around the world to fill the gaps. I mean, we're now talking about skill shortage in Australia again. That will never change. And, you know, if it's not through graduates in Australia, it will be naturally through the immigration system. So, and that will at some point come to a head, and people will change the rules, and the 417 visas will change, and, you know, life goes on.
A few years ago, I went up to Indonesia to, I went and gave a Valmin talk and workshop at an Indonesian geological conference. And, you know, they had a wealth of Indonesian geology and mining engineering graduates. And so, you know, there are
huge industry.
Definitely huge industry and professionals getting trained there. And I'm sure, you know, the opportunity for them to come and work in somewhere like Australia, which is seen as a pretty sophisticated mining industry, and then return to their countries, you know, and Indonesia is just one example.
Like Turkey has got like 45,000 geologists, you know, that's 4 times more than we have members in the AusMM, and I might have my numbers wrong there, but it's gigantic. So but we need to be more open to that. And Jackie, I talked to Jackie Coombs about that the other day, and she's a real advocate for that sort of globalization of the workforce, and she meets so many good people in different jurisdictions. We're not tapping into that.
And the women in mining industry is quite interesting too, because in Australia it's been very proactive about trying to get women to mentor other women, and that's now extended, and it's been running for quite a few years on an international basis. So, you know, I did, when I was at BHP, I mentored a geologist in Mexico, and that was fantastic because, you know, and that was sort of just before all the communications that we take for granted now are around. But, you know, these sort of communications do allow these sorts of things to happen. So,
well, that's spot on. I mean, we are so closely connected to everybody else in the world right now that's so I think the problem will resolve itself, and especially as I am about it, and I think we should do something. It's you know, people will move, and it's if the flights become a bit cheaper.
Is just sharing with each other what we're doing to advance the industry. One of the big things there is education, and you know, I think you've probably seen this, that there's been a tragic drop off in students studying for earth sciences, and what we need to do is build that back up again, and encourage our universities to maintain those strong geology and earth science departments, so we can continue to have the next generation come through, because it's tragic how the numbers have fallen away, and how some universities have let things slide in terms of faculties. We need to be, if we want to get better at exploiting the Earth's resources in an ethical way, we've got to have the best people involved in the process, and that's a major focus for us. It's part of telling our story, that's front and centre.
Yeah, well, look, that's interesting, because literally everybody I speak to says pretty much the same thing. So it's a sign that almost doesn't need further enhancing. But whoever I talk to in whatever corner of the world, whatever position or level or background, technical, non-technical, finance, they are all saying the same thing. So this is real, and we covered that. We gave that a fair bit of time on the channel. And the solutions are beyond us all, but I mean, the dialogue and looking for that dialogue and being inclusive there is part of the way out. So appreciate that thought. And